Hi, everybody. Welcome to Step Into the Story. I'm flying solo today. Barb is hanging out in the Caribbean. I'm a little bit jealous of that. And I'm joined today by Kate Thompson, and I'm so excited to have you here. It was so much fun being your guest earlier this year, and now you're here to talk about the Wartime Book Club. So welcome.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you for having me on. It's so wonderful to have a kind of reciprocal relationship where I had you on from the Library with Love, my podcast, and you come back on. So now you're turning the tables on me.
I am turning the tables on you. Now you're in the hot seat.
Because I'm a journalist, so I'm always used to asking the questions. And even after all these years of writing novels, I still find my comfort zone is the one of asking, not responding.
Yeah, I can imagine. But that journalism background serves you so well. I can already tell, like, with your research and with the kind of books that you're writing, which we're going to get to in a little bit, because that's a really interesting story. But first, so give our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Okay, where to begin? So I am based just outside of London and Surrey. I live in a former bakery by the River Thames. I'm a journalist, really, which is, as we just discussed, I still consider myself a journalist first and foremost. I've been working in Fleet Street for sort of 30 years plus. And then I came to writing really after my children were born. I thought I need a career that offers a bit more flexibility away from a news desk. And so I became a ghost writer, which is not to say I write spooky stories, but I helped other people to write their stories. And really, it was through doing that gave me the confidence, I think, to write a longer form narrative. And so I suppose it was a nice sort of soft kind of entry into book writing. And it was really through writing the memoirs of a number of women, especially those who were around during World War II, that piqued my interest in wartime women. And my agent said, look, why go at writing your own novels? Which, quite honestly, I think would have been completely beyond any scope of ambition that I had for myself. I never thought that was something that would ever be within my realm. But, I think being a ghostwriter and writing other people's books was the perfect kind of springboard for me to branch out and experiment with creativity. So I suppose now, after, where are we now? 11 books on fiction and non-fiction, I consider myself a journalist, ghostwriter, and novelist in that package.
Well, I have to say, this was the first book of yours that I've read.
Oh, was it? Okay.
And it hit me in all my happy buttons. So when I think about the kind of World War II, because I love World War II, it's a favorite genre or time period for me to read in the genre. And as I was reading it, I'm like, this is like my reading crack, because it's got that cozy, intimate feel. It's nostalgic. It's got light moments and endearing characters. And there are times when you laugh, and then there are other moments where you're just gutted. Like, I have to say, I know I wiped my eyes. Now, not a full-on ugly cry, but like those heartstringy moments that really got to me at least half a dozen times in this book, which doesn't happen as often as it used to. So I just love it when that happens. And so, well done. Now I'm going to have to go back and get the Wartime Library. But it was just a delight to read, and I couldn't wait to get back to it. So what inspired the characters of Bea and Grace, like, in particular, not just the situations, but like those actual characters?
Well, firstly, thank you for such lovely comments. And it's so interesting you say that, because I always have as a benchmark in my mind when I'm coming to a novel that I want to evoke all the feelings. I want readers to cry and to laugh and to be shocked, and the whole range. I think you've got to evoke all of those emotions so that we can get up close to those characters. And in terms of who inspired my characters, they are always inspired by real women. I've spent the last sort of 10 to nearly 15 years now working through a lot of shoe leather, pounding the streets, just getting interviews with anybody that can remember the war years. You know, anybody that lived before the advent of a welfare state or has stories to tell from the war. I don't even wait to see what you did in the war. If you were around, I'm there and I'm interviewing you, because everybody that lived through those cataclysmic times has a story to tell. And so the character of Bee, who works at the post office under German occupation, I'm sure everybody knows who's watched the Guernsey Literary Potato Peel Pie Society, that the Channel Islands were the only British territory to be occupied by the Germans during World War II. And so they didn't have to live with the threat of Nazi bombs, but they had to live with their uninvited guests, you know, through the dignity of an occupation. And so my character Bee, who works in the post office, has what I like to call quiet resistance. She steams open letters that are bound for the German commandant from people writing poisonous pen letters informing on their neighbours. And she then goes and warns the people that are being denounced, and in doing so saves lives. So it's kind of, I wanted to redress this narrative that the Channel Islands didn't have much in the way of resistance, because from my research, I found the absolute opposite to be true, that there was a sort of band of, you know, organic band really of unorganized but clandestine resistance, mainly fueled by working class women. And B, you know, women working in the library and the post office were very much at the heart of that. And so I went to Jersey 5 times over the course of 2 years, and just again went to age concern, coffee mornings, groups, bingo halls, you name it. I would go and interview people, and these stories began unraveling. You know, this wonderful, rich, kind of unfiltered gush of history. And it was through these interviews that I learnt of the actions of the women and the men working at the post office and the library. So yeah, again, inspired by real women. And as I'm writing these characters, I hear the voices of women. They're never just based on one character. They're an amalgamation of lots of women. But I hear their voices in my ear, and the kind of rich, spirited vernacular that I hear from women of the East End of London especially. And I just pour it into my characters. So yeah, that is who they are, really.
Yeah, because they're best friends, and really more like sisters. Like, they're incredibly close, and you really see that toward the end. Another one of those heartstringy moments. And I don't want to give any spoilers, but there was one point at the end I was like, is Bee really going to do that? Is she really going to, you know? And it was like, but it'll be okay. And so, but they were very different as well. Like, Grace is very quiet. You know, she doesn't want to make ripples, whereas Bee's really opinionated, and her mouth sometimes gets her into trouble, and she's a little more impulsive.
Yeah.
So yeah. I found that, and I actually found, like, sometimes, especially in the beginning, not so much as the book went on and things get a little bit darker even, but I was like, Bee, shut up. Like, what are you doing? Like, So I found that really interesting that they were very different, and even Bee's relationship with her sister Nancy.
Yeah. Bee is a hothead. She's very irreverent and slightly subversive. And I have to say, she's very much based on a lot of women that I have met over the years from the East End of London, real Cockneys, strong, feisty, you know, women, you know, got laugh as dirty as a drain. They take no prisoners. She's very much, sorry, I've got a little guest.
That's okay. You know what? Normally, if Barb's here, she has a cat that's on the back of her chair at least once during the broadcast. So fur babies are welcome.
Good timing. So Bee is very irreverent and subversive. And I thought, you know, she would be that kind of feisty character, which in peacetime really wouldn't be a problem. But when she's under the guise of, you know, the German secret field police and living under a very ruthless totalitarian regime, how does that play out? And obviously, without giving any spoilers, you see where that mouth of hers gets her in trouble towards the end of the book.
Well, and it makes sense because she comes by it very honestly. Her mother, Queenie, is a real character. So you can see where she gets it. And it's almost like Queenie has the feistiness, but a little bit of wisdom that comes with age on how to use it. Whereas Bee is, you know, just a little more of a firecracker and doesn't quite have that restraint that maybe
filter, has she? She just kind of,
Yeah, yeah. Was there really, okay, no, first I have to ask you, so why Jersey? Like, because your last one, like the Wartime Library is set in an really, it's a library underground, right, in London during the Blitz. So why did you pick Jersey?
The honest answer is I was invited over there for the Jersey Literary Festival in 2018, and I went. I've never been ever, which is odd because it's British territory. I'm from London. It's only like a 30-minute flight away. But I went because I've been invited to speak at this literary festival. And when I was there, there is this very, very, the air is thick with history. Sorry, just 1 minute. I think we... Apologies.
No, it's all good.
And now my lights decided to crash. We're doing really well here. Yes, so when I was there was this very tangible sense of history in the air, and I just became fascinated by it. And it was actually when I went to visit a museum on the island the day after the festival, I saw a plaque on the wall of the museum that was commemorating the actions of the postal workers who steamed open and intercepted poison pen letters. And it was just a tiny little plaque on the wall. It was no more than about 3 or 4 paragraphs. And it really hit me, and I think you'll relate to this, Donna, when you're trying to find stories. It really hit me in the kind of solar plexus, and I thought, yes, that there is a whole novel. I could wrap a whole novel just around that one plaque. So it just got me, and that's all it takes. When I can feel my way into a story, and I know that I can add so much more to it, it just hooks you in. And then I knew that was it. I was writing a novel based there.
It's the lightning strike, right?
Say that again, sorry.
It's the lightning strike of an idea where you just see something and it's like, boom, there it is.
And you just know there and then in your heart, that's a story. In the way that when I wrote the Little Wartime Library, which was based, as you said earlier, on an underground library built over the tracks of a tube tunnel during World War II, again, a true story. And I found out about that through interviewing a lovely elderly lady called Pat, who was 95, and she told me that she went to the little underground library and that she used to borrow Millie Molly Mandy, and she would wander up the long, gloomy tunnel. And she said that library, that underground library, sparked a lifelong love of reading. Boom, the lightning strike again. Wow, what an incredible premise for a story.
Right.
So that's how it hooked me in.
So then I guess my other character question, as far as what inspired characters, was there really a wolf? So in the book, there's the commandant is they call him the wolf.
That's right.
And he's pretty terrifying. And I'm trying to think of how I would describe him. He just has this presence he is the big bad wolf. Like, he's predatory, but he's put together. He's very calculating. Like, everything he does is purposeful and dangerous. And so was there really, is he based on a real person, or is this just like you took the commandant and made him into a wolf, I guess?
I would love to tell you that he was a figment of my imagination, or that he's based again on an amalgamation of people. But in this case, he is 100% a real person. And I'm always reminded of a comment that an old Fleet Street editor of mine said, that there is nothing so extraordinary as real life. There is nothing anything you make up could never be as extreme as what actually is real life. And in this case, Heinz Karl Wuffel, or as he was nicknamed by Islanders, the Wolf, was a real man. And he did make the lives of many Islanders a misery. He was responsible for the incarceration and imprisonment of a number of Islanders, including a woman called Louisa Gould, who was, whose story I wove into the narrative, who was imprisoned for helping to conceal an escaped Russian slave, who was deported off the island and very sadly died in the gas chambers at Ravensbrück. And he was responsible for her plight, along with, I think, 30 other Islanders who ended up in concentration camps in occupied France and in Germany. So yeah, he was a real man. And at the end of the book, I write about him and many of the other real characters that because I think it's interesting and important for readers to know the lines, where you've taken creative license, who's real. I think it adds extra richness, extra complexity to the story if you know the framework upon which the writers worked.
And the author's note is great for that, isn't it? Like I love as an author being able to go back and say, hey, this is like what I made up, but this is what I found out and how extraordinary that is.
I love author's notes, and I often I spend quite a lot of time with them, and I expand it out. So I have the author's note, and then I have, in this case, I had islanders who inspired the stories of the real islanders and their photos and a kind of rich interviews, and I just try to weave in as much as I can, really. So for me, it's like a book, a magazine, a non-fiction, all rolled up in.
I know. Yeah, and Louisa's character is so lovely. It really is. Like there were just so many great characters. The physiotherapist, of course, that was doing his part, and so many people that were resisting, and like you said, not in an organized way, but just doing little things that and honestly, like sometimes I got wondering if they had been organized, if it would have been more dangerous, because there's a huge, I would even go as far as saying like a huge theme in the story of judgment. And because we see it in B and some of the other characters with regard to her sister Nancy, who is in love with the German soldier. And so, of course, there's the whole Jerry bag, component. Then we see it with neighbors turning on neighbors, where it is the poison pen letters, and they're informing on their neighbors for whatever reason. And I think as someone on the outside looking in on that situation, I just kept thinking, how could they think that they're going to profit from this? They're going to take the information and it's not going to make life better for them. You know what I mean? And then there's also a component of like having a baby out of wedlock, and what that means, and how society is so judgmental. And so then in the middle of all these heartwarming resistance moments, you have also, the spirit of the islanders is so great, but then this underbelly of judgment underneath, and how difficult that was. And there's this dark side to it. So I kind of felt like if they had actually had an organized resistance movement, it's a small community, how if they'd been informed upon, if that's the right way to put it, it would have taken down the whole structure instead of these little moments of subversive actions and
sort of impromptu pockets. I never really thought of it that way before, Donna, but you're absolutely right. Yeah, if it had been like it was in France, with a very organized network of resistance, I think the jeopardy and the consequences would have been much more severe and high. But because it was, Jersey is just a tiny island, really. It's only 5 miles by 12, and there's just one central town. There's lots of little villages dotted around, and there wasn't much movement between those villages. Islanders were reduced to bicycles with sort of hose pipes for wheels, and there was no buses or public transport. And so what you had was just these little sort of individual pockets of, again, women working behind the post office, behind the library counter, in the village store, just doing what they could to reckon with their sense of morality, and to how when the war is over and the occupation is over, how will I sit with what I did and my own personal behavior in the war? I mean, we all look at it as readers and novelists with the benefit of hindsight. We know that the war went on for nearly 6 years. We know when their liberation day came. But for islanders living through those long, dark, dreary days full of privation and danger and fear and suffering, they had no idea. So I think, and adding to the mix as well, the islanders were starving. I mean, nobody had enough food to eat. Malnutrition was off the scale. People were dying of diseases that were preventable in wartime. And so you had this horrible kind of toxic culture, I suppose. Occupations inject poison into those areas. So you have islanders who are starving and fearful, and then you throw jealousy into the mix, or he's got more than I have. And we none of us know how would we behave in an occupation
Right.
that I would resist, and that I would be the one hiding escaped Russian slaves in my shed or steaming open occupants' letters. Would I? I don't know. But I think therein lies an interesting premise for a novelist to play with, and hopefully for a reader to read, is that it throws up this moral quagmire that we as readers can all put ourselves into those shoes. What would I have done? How would I have behaved?
Yeah.
In a jerry bag, and I think a lot of it depends on what stage you're at in life. If you're a young woman and there's a handsome German soldier strolling along the street, the streets are devoid of young men. Of course, some of them have their head turned. It doesn't mean to say that they shared the ideology, but just that they were young girls behaving like young girls everywhere do.
Yeah. Or even, like, I know my daughter's a mom now, and she's like, I never really thought about it, but the things that you would do for your children that you might, and we really don't know how we would act in any situation. I just got thinking too about the judgment, and there's a scene toward the end, even on a boat, where a woman is very judgmental about the fact that somebody might have been an evacuee rather than staying throughout the occupation. And it's like, wow, like even if you'd been an evacuee, you probably went to London and like went through the Blitz. Like, it's just
so easier. But
it's like this weird pain Olympics kind of thing, right? And so there were so many interesting components of that. And when you think about, go ahead. When you think about the fact that it's a small island and already you've lost men who have gone to fight, and then you've lost more people who have evacuated, it becomes a very, very small community. And where do you go? If you're in France and you're in the resistance, and you think that your cell is going to be revealed, you go somewhere else and assume another identity, but you can't do that on Jersey. You're stuck there.
In a microcosm,
it really is.
But I love that phrase. What was it you said? The Olympics of
the pain Olympics.
and never is that more applicable than in an island like Jersey, which a lot of people look at it now as almost like the blueprint for, had England been invaded, would we have behaved like them? Because we are, ostensibly the same people. We are all British. Would we have behaved like that? And there was this phrase I heard called a hierarchy of suffering. And that was very true there, that, people that evacuated to so-called safety, they were called rats from a sinking ship when they returned. And very interestingly, after Liberation Day, we saw this dreadful spectacle of the women that were branded as jerry bags, who had relationships with German soldiers after the war, absolutely vilified. And there was one horrifying case. A young woman was chased the streets and she was stripped, and they threatened to string her up from a lamppost. It was only when a policeman got involved that it all settled down. But for anybody that watched the absolutely brilliant film Lee with Kate Winslet in, but if you haven't watched it, please do. It's just amazing.
I missed it when it came to theaters.
Okay.
And then it was coming about an hour away to a playhouse for just a one afternoon showing, and I had a prior commitment, so I still haven't seen it. I'm dying to watch it.
Good.
But even in Band of Brothers, which again, like, we're talking 20 some years ago, there is a scene in Holland where, when Holland is liberated, that women are taken into the square and their heads are shaved and they're stripped, and you can understand it, but at the same time, it's very cruel. It's a very cruel way to treat other human beings.
Yeah, it is. And the same thing happened in Jersey, women having their clothes stripped and their hair, which is so much part of a woman's identity. To steal that from a woman is like just robbing her of her identity. But, emotions ran high for people that lost loved ones in the camps and the ghettos. There is a level to which I can understand that anger and that drive for sort of vengeance and retribution. And I think all those emotions come to the fore, especially on an island as tiny as Jersey, where there's nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. And for many years afterwards, lots of women, I had a really sad story, actually. One of the a tour guide that I interviewed said that very recently an elderly lady had moved into a care home on the island. She couldn't live independently any longer. And she walked into the communal lounge. And as one, all the women in the lounge turned their back on her. And her crime was that she was a jerry bag. So even decades on, people still remembered her as such. So her whole life had been tarnished with that. I mean, I think when it comes to the occupation, memories are long. And so I found that really shocking, that and stories I'd heard that of women who were shopping in the market, 20 years on from the occupation would still be spat at for being, accusation of a horizontal collaborator, as they sometimes called women.
Yeah.
Or a jerry bag. So I really wanted to explore all those complexities within the book. But, at the same time, just like you said, being a novel that made people feel things, feel that sense of love and community, and also the love of books, that
we haven't even talked about the library yet, and the book club.
Exactly. As you think about it, when the beaches were sealed off, the occupying authorities closed down all the clubs, the theatres, all the films were only ones that were sort of Nazi approved. They even shut down like the Scouts and the Tiddlywink Club. So there was nothing to do apart from read. So library loans soared during the occupation. As one islander said it to me, the library was our spiritual food store. So I found that really interesting as well. And I thought, I love books about books. I love exploring reading and clubs and what it means to us. So I had a lot of fun with that element of the story as well.
I loved Grace. She seemed to have the wisdom or the restraint that Bee lacked, but she still came up with innovative ways. And if Bee was the one shaking things up, it was like Grace was in charge of morale. And and she had this place in her office where she was hiding banned books, so that because they had to clean their stacks, and I loved that, and I loved how sometimes she would deliver them to people by just changing the jacket.
Yeah.
So it would read something totally boring and uninteresting, and it would be this banned book. The thing that I loved that you did was that at the beginning of each chapter, you put a little section about a book that was banned and why, or about the author and why that happened. And I thought that was just, I learned so much. And books that you would look at and go, why would you ever ban that? Yeah. And so I really loved that you did that. That was a really nice little bonus.
Said that, Donna. I really am, because that was a case of, what it's like when you're researching and you keep turning up all this information and that there's more that you can feasibly, way more than you could ever put into the narrative, and if you did, it would be like a big information dump, and it wouldn't have its part to play. But then you think, but that's so interesting. Like, I didn't know that Bambi was originally a book by a Jewish author that had been banned. That blew my mind. So when I heard that, I thought,
my mind was blown. I read that to my daughter when we were sitting there, and I'm like, oh my God, did you know this?
I know. I love the Tolkien, J.R. Tolkien, the author of Lord of the Rings, had his book approached by the German authorities who wanted to license it, but wanted to check his Aryan credentials to make sure that he had no Jewish ancestry before they published it in Germany. And he wrote this absolutely stinging rebuke saying that Hitler was a ruddy little ignoramus, and I just love that. I love the character. So I thought, well, I could put it at the of each chapter, like a framing device, something to set the tone.
It was, and sometimes, like, I immediately just went to like the story that I'm working on right now and how I could do that, and I'm like, no, it would just look like I'm inserting stuff because I want to, like. But you really did use it as a framing device that made sense, and it was cohesive, and I just loved that. I loved how you brought that in.
I think you can't do it in all books, because I have tried. Sometimes it has to fit the tone. I mean, when I wrote the Little Wartime Library, I just wrote that, generically, chapter 1, chapter 2. But then because I interviewed so many librarians as research, and again, they were just telling me these incredible stories. Almost some of them were really just great sound bites. Like a woman said to me, you know, a librarian, she said, Kate, you know, if you want to join the world, if you want to see the world, don't join the army, become a librarian. So I suddenly thought,
whoa,
perfect as a little quote at the start of each chapter from a librarian. So I did that for the little wartime library. And I got a lot of feedback from readers saying, oh, I really like that device. So I thought, oh, yeah, I have to find a way to kind of weave that back into the Wartime Book Club.
That made perfect sense.
Yeah.
That made perfect sense. I can't believe we're at 30 minutes
I know.
already. It's been silly. Okay, so I want to give you some time to talk about your latest project because it's super interesting. It's super relevant. And I love that you're doing this. I remember I was actually in Devon at the HNS conference in September when something popped up through, I don't know if it was Publishers Weekly or something, there was some sort of notification that about this project. And I remember turning to Barb and saying, oh my gosh, have you heard what Kate Thompson's doing now? This is such an interesting story. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
I still find it hard to talk about this book in some ways because I'm only just now putting the final touches to it, and it's quite an emotional book for me, and it's a bit of a departure from what I usually do. It's a non-fiction. So I've written a book in collaboration with one of the world's oldest Holocaust survivors, so Renée Salt, who is 95 years old. She lives in North London, and we have together worked on a narrative that encompasses not only her experiences as a Jewish woman surviving the Holocaust, but also the life that she made for herself after the war. And that's it, really. We've charted her whole story from the occupation of Poland when she was a 10-year-old girl to her liberation from Bergen-Belsen in 1945 when she was 15 years old. And the book is coming out on the 80th anniversary of her liberation from Bergen-Belsen.
That just gives me chills.
I know. I mean, when I met Renée 2.5, 3 years ago now, and she said, I've never, and I listened to her do a talk about her experiences, and I was absolutely spellbound by her story. And the story is harrowing, as you'd imagine. She was not only in 2 ghettos, including the notorious Lodz ghetto. She was imprisoned at Auschwitz-Birkenau. She was in slave labour in Hamburg. She was in the hellhole that was Bergen-Belsen. But very much the thread that runs through this book is about how she managed to, or rather her mother managed to keep her by her side through the whole 6 years of persecution, you know, from ghetto to camp to liberation. There was one hand in hers and it was her mother's. And she accredits her survival with that of her mother, you know, her mother's love. So there's a strong current of hope, of humanity. It shows what us as human beings are capable of. She's a remarkable woman. And when she said to me at the end of this talk, oh, I've never had my book published, but I would love to. I no one's ever asked. And I thought, yeah, this story deserves to be told. And so that's what we've been doing for the last year, really. I've been doing lots of research, which I love. I followed in Renée's footsteps from her hometown, or the city rather, Stunska Wola in Poland, and then I literally sort of traced it chronologically as her journey of persecution went, ending up in Bergen-Belsen in Germany. So yeah, I'm nervously awaiting the reception of this book, because it's something slightly different. It's not all first person. It's Renée's testimony as she recalls it, and then wrapped around it is my research that I hope contextualizes her story and tells a bigger picture that she couldn't have known in the moments of her persecution.
You know, I feel like your experience both as a journalist and a ghostwriter makes you then a novelist makes you perfectly poised for this project.
Okay.
So I am really looking forward to it. Like I said, when I first heard about it, it was one of those oh my God moments where I just think it's such an amazing thing to be a part of. So I'm sure it's going to be lovely, and not lovely in the wartime library and book club sort of, that kind of sense, but just, I'm sure you will do it justice because You seem to have a way of pulling out both the beautiful emotions and not being afraid to go where it's dark. So
yeah, it is a harrowing story. There is no doubt, and we are unflinching. And Rini's been so incredible because she has mined her memory, and it's been very triggering and traumatic for her to recall, because she doesn't just remember it, she actually visualizes it. She has flashbacks. So she's been incredibly courageous to, after 80 years as a 95-year-old woman, to revisit those places in her mind.
yeah.
So I hope the reception of it, that people see something in it. But it's
so what's the release date again, Kate?
So it comes out in the US through Alcove 4th of March, and in Canada through Simon & Schuster 4th of March again. Okay. And in English, so in America, actually, it's going to be called Do Not Cry When I Die, which was her mother's last words to her. And in England, it's called A Mother's Promise, and that's coming out in February. So lots of staggered release dates.
Yeah, but not too far apart, though, which is nice.
Months apart, yeah. And they have different covers, but the story inside is exactly the same. So the story I'm most proud of is the one I feel most emotionally connected to. So I'd love to know what readers think of it.
I am looking forward to it. All right, so we always wind up on a bit of a lighter note, which is, okay, so we always talk about what we're reading right now. So what are you reading right now?
Glad you asked me this question, because I have just finished a book that is, it's just breathtaking. I've got a bad book hangover. I can't face another book for a while afterwards. So it's Jodi Picoult's By Any Other Name. And it is, have you read it, Donna?
No.
If you have, please do. It is just her best. I love Jodi's books, but this one is her best yet. This is a woman at the height of her powers. And it's really, she's woven a whole narrative around a lady called Amelia Bassano, who she makes a very good claim for being the rightful writer of a lot of Shakespeare's plays, sonnets, and so forth. It is unbelievable. It's just the best book I think I've read all year round. So if you have, it's just, I can't even, I think you just need to read it. But it's it's a dual timeline. She has part obviously set in Elizabethan London with this character Amelia Bassano, and then a current day narrative of Amelia Bassano's descendant, a young woman in New York who's trying to uncover her story. So it makes you rethink everything you think you know about Shakespeare and Elizabethan London.
I love that. Okay, so I had a road trip last weekend, and I don't generally do audiobooks, but I really was not into my music playlist on the drive, and it was 4 hours each way. So I started listening to Yours Cheerfully by A.J. Pierce because I had read Dear Mrs. Bird and loved it. And I got to tell you, I'm not done it yet, but every time I get in my car and I go somewhere, it's like, oh, what's going to happen now? I love her books because they're so funny. But like yours, there will always be a moment where she'll just like rip your heart out. And I, in the first book, it had to do with Bunty and William. And in this book, I haven't quite gotten there yet, but I know it's coming. And honestly, I find that I'm responding to the tension differently as an audio reader than if there's a certain situation with like a scene where the main character is talking with someone, and I'm like, this isn't going to end well. Like, I just got this horrible feeling. So I hope that I'm wrong about what's coming. But so I've been reading that, but I always have to have a paper, something going on. So I'm just starting The Lies We Leave Behind by Noelle Salazar. It's her new one. Noelle's an auto-buy for me, and she's lovely. So, and it just came out maybe 4 weeks ago. It's a pretty recent release. So that's what I'm starting for my paper copy.
I love that you do that. I do the same. So I have my Audible book when I'm driving the kids around, or I'm chopping onions for dinner, or every spare pocket of time is filled with a story that way. But then when I go to bed at night, I have to have a paper copy in my hands. I have to be reading as well. So I think the two complement one another. I think.
Yeah. And honestly, I'm thinking, like, I live 5 minutes from the grocery store. I'm like, I need to go for a long drive somewhere. But I do have a lunch coming up on the weekend that's an hour each way. And I'm
Perfect.
thinking that might be long enough to finish it because I'm that close. So anyway, it's kind of silly,
You frame your whole life around the journeys where you can listen to books.
right? Instead of it yeah, instead of being I have to drive somewhere, it's like, ooh, where can I go that I can listen to anyway? It's kind of funny.
Just feel, for me, it's escape. It's those little pockets of or moments of time where you could just step out of your world and into another. For therapy.
And catch up on, like, for me, it's like I get in the truck and it's like, ooh, what's Emmy getting up to now? You know what I mean? So anyway, it's been really great.
Oh.
But speaking of really great, it's been really great having you here. Thank you so much for joining me today.
For hours, couldn't we? I mean,
and this happened the last time we chatted too. I felt like we just had such a good time chatting about stuff. So thank you for joining me. The Wartime Book Club is lovely, lovely, lovely. If you're a fan of World War II, really, I would call it resistance fiction. Pick it up, be prepared to fall in love with some characters, and keep your tissues nearby. And it's just lovely. Thank you so much for writing it. It was exactly what I needed at the time I needed it.
Sorry about my hairy gate crasher as well.
Listen, we welcome hairy gate crashers. It's fine. It's fine. I have my door completely shut, so I didn't have one of 3 cats coming in today. So.
Oh, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for inviting me on.
All right. And everyone else, you can catch this on YouTube. You can join our community at facebook.com/groups/step into the story. And we will see you soon.